please welcome Devrah. How are you this evening?
I'm terrific. How are you?
I'm
Lovely
doing
to meet
good.
you.
I'm glad to speak with you.
Yeah, it's great.
So, first of all, I want to start out with how did you discover your own personal spiritual path?
Well, it happened quite a few years ago, I would say. Well, I won't tell you how many.
That's okay. That'll be our secret.
We'll keep that a secret. Uh, but I was about 29 at the time, and I was modeling and dancing. But I had something that would go on inside of me all the time, kind of like a longing for something that I didn't really know what it was exactly. But I thought it was children, so I decided, okay, I'm going to have to get pregnant. I have to have children. Problem was I hadn't menstruated for years. So I went to a specialist and discovered that my uterus had, in his words, dissolved. So I was devastated, as you can imagine, when you're at that age where you're just longing to have kids. So I went, through the medical route and didn't have much success. But then I sought out some healing modalities, including meditation. And it was during one meditation retreat that I had what is called a direct experience of the truth or enlightenment of who and what I really am. Now, this was the most profound moment I'd ever experienced. I experienced absolute love, a love that went far beyond the confines of just our body and mind. It was beyond anything that I'd ever experienced up until that point. And then a miraculous healing soon followed this experience. This enlightened experience was so profound that it literally changed my life forever and put me in a completely different direction. And to top it off, my uterus actually grew back shortly thereafter, which they said was a miracle. But that wasn't even the big part of it. That was sort of a little offshoot of the real experience of oneness and love with, well, my experience was, I am God. This is God. And then even the word God fell away, and then it was just pure light. So that does change one's life, and I would say that's about where it all started. And then I began to study with masters and gurus. I spent my whole life basically, in ashrams and meditation and teaching it, and that's, after that experience, there was nowhere else I could really go. It just sort of guided me, and people then came out of nowhere for sessions and for counseling, and perception was so transformed, and I just realized I'm not this body mind, and I could never go back.
Well, I think that that's a good point that you made. Once we set, and I know I can speak for all the rest of the hosts on this show, because there's 3 more other hosts on the show, and I know I can speak for them that once we set our foot on that path, you might step off it for a little bit, but you always come back to it. It's an integral part of your life from there on. That sounds like you experienced a miraculous healing.
I did,
there.
Yeah.
And there's been so much, written about all of that and documented about miraculous healings. And so were these experiences that you had, this is what eventually had inspired you to write your books, The Magic Doorway to Enlightenment?
Well, part of it was that. I mean, I wasn't planning to write a book at all. Most of my books have come from receiving commands from from the higher beings, and I was given a command: you must write this book, and it gave me an idea of what it would be and what it would look like, and it would have poetry, and it would have like essays, and all of it was set out a long time ago, and I of course didn't want to do it because I didn't consider myself a writer, and the group that I was leading at the time kept encouraging me to write the book. And then I happened to run into a Indian mystic, and he said, "You must write that book." Well, he didn't even know I was writing. I was even thinking about it, or that it had even come through my mind. He said, "You must write that book. It will help a lot of people." So eventually I was broken down, and I started scratching away, and it really took about 12 years to put that first book together. Because I had to feel that I had experienced everything that I had written.
And it's interesting when you talked about your background as a dancer and a model and all of that. Those types of, careers tend to really be ego-based. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, they can be very ego-based at one level, but once you've experienced your divine self, it doesn't have to be. It's sort of like another angle to it. You can enjoy things from a whole other level. So at the time, of course, it was very ego-based, and that's why I was so empty, because I was so separated from myself, and I really wanted something that was really real. But afterwards, I found that I could enjoy all sorts of things without feeling separate anymore, because I knew who I was at that point.
So the feeling of separateness, do you believe that that's related to the next subject, the subject of your next book, which is healing guilt? Do you believe that separateness, and like when we come into this world, we don't come with any guilt. It's set upon us in our life experiences.
Well, I think guilt is the greatest separator of all. The guilt is what keeps us from our enlightenment, because as long as we have guilt, we don't allow ourselves to feel our divine self. And I was really curious about this. All the clients I had would have tons of guilt, and friends, and everyone was talking about guilt all the time, and grief and sadness. And I thought, okay, we've got to look at this. I've got to look at this. I'm going to, research this and see what the heck is going on with this. So I looked at psychological guilt. I did something wrong, or I didn't do something I should have done. And that wasn't doing it for me. It was like, yeah. Or even existential. That felt closer because it was a little bit more mystical, and you were longing for something that you didn't know. But then it was kind of neurotic, and that you would be, that kind of guilt places or projects onto everything, something to be feeling bad about. But eventually, I did the research with the masters, and I'd spent all my time in, ashrams and everything, and had access to a lot of teachings, as well as my own experience, because when I experienced that divine love, there was no guilt, there was no oneness, there was nothing. It was gone. So what I came to from my research, and I researched everything from the Sikhs to the Course in Miracles on this deep guilt, which is the reason we have it. It's a core guilt. It goes beyond all other guilts. And what it is that we have a belief that we've actually separated from our source. We believe that we're here in a dualistic way, but in fact, we're not. In fact, we're already one. So it's that kind of guilt that follows you around, and you don't necessarily see it as guilt. It could come in the form of abandonment, anger, rage, grief. It could come in the form of pretty much anything that's ego-based, anything that's about separation. And so what I discovered from this is the core. This is the real core of our guilt. For example, the teachings of Buddhism say that guilt is missing the mark. We only have guilt because we've missed the mark. We've missed the mark being that we haven't joined with our divine self. Instead, we believed ourselves to be separate. Just because of the mere fact, when we look outside of ourselves, we see separation. So I call this guilt quantum guilt because
that's pretty heavy, quantum guilt.
well, because
That
it's
is
the
pretty
darkness of
heavy.
the
Wow.
yeah. Yeah, because it's kind of like the darkness of the ages, the largest guilt coming from the smallest possible, infinitesimally small separation from the very beginning of time. So I researched all this quantum business, plus I threw a leap in it too. So the quantum guilt is the guilt that we don't know that we have, and it's hidden in the unconscious mind. And we have this guilt because we believe that we've separated from our source of oneness. And by the mere fact that wherever we look, we see separation, war, conflict, divorce, some part of us feels we've done something terribly wrong to be experiencing all of this pain. And this guilt is the root of all other kinds of guilt, as I just mentioned, as well as being at the core of all the ego disturbances. So all of the ego stuff comes from this core guilt, because once you believe you've separated, then boom, all of these ego tendencies come into play. And that includes our fear, our unworthiness, all of the judgment, grief, and pretty much any sense of separation.
Well, do you think it's related when children become more aware? When they're just toddlers and they're babies and they're open to the connection with the universe, they would feel absolutely no guilt. But do you think as soon as they became more aware of the world and they're told certain things by their parents, that this guilt, they inherit this guilt? Or do you feel it's more like a past life thing? Because in some types of counseling, when there is this type of guilt, they do go through the whole past life regressions to deal with that. Is that part of your method, through past life regressions?
Actually, no, I go even beyond the past life. And the reason being is because everything, at the very core, there's no time, there's no past, and there's no future. At the very absolute level, where we are all one with everything, there's nothing going on. There's no cause and effect, there's no karma, there's no past life, there's only love. So I don't go through the past lives. What I do is I go right to the root of where my client has felt that they've separated. And we keep going through those levels, until they really get to that core place in themselves where they feel they really feel they separated from God, or they've really separated from their real self. And it comes out of left field. I mean, I don't know. I'm just the person that facilitates them. But out of the blue, and they don't even know exactly what I'm working on with them. They say, I've separated from God, and that's why I'm suffering.
Now, when you define the separation from God, because God, you're speaking of the creator force, the higher being.
Yeah. The source, say. I use the word God because, when I have my direct experience, I am God. But even the word God fell away. So that which is, somewhere we have left the place of oneness and love. Somewhere we've left that. I think to keep it simple, it's like the oneness and the love. Having left that, then what is there but separation? So it's either oneness or separation. So we're either one with ourselves and love, and we see each other through divine eyes, or we're separate and we see each other through the eyes of, that jerk, he got in my way,
this person cut me off. All of that.
All of that. That's what happens after the separation. Before the separation, it's okay, go ahead. After the separation, it's like, you.
Boy. Well, people who engage in road rage should probably, they need to find their oneness. Don't you agree?
Well, I mean, even that's a way to try to find. Everyone's looking for the oneness. Even in their rage, they're looking for the oneness. It's a cry for help. It's like what we do with this guilt is we project it onto others. So when we have the guilt, it's terribly uncomfortable. I mean, you know those days when you wake up and you just feel like hell.
I don't know. I'm feeling pretty guilty right now. You're getting me to feel guilty. Oh, you start thinking when you start even saying that word. I think it's a conditioning. You're saying and you're thinking, okay, what did I do? Did I have to atone for? Is there something karmically that I did? You know, and it would be related to something on this plane and on another plane. Don't you agree?
Well, there's many levels, of course, absolutely. And what I'm dealing with today is just the one, you either are or you aren't.
Well, what about guilt and sin? I know sin is something that is a concept that was put out there mainly by some of the organized religions. But what is your definition of sin?
Well, sin is kind of guilt and sin, they kind of need each other to keep going. But when one falls away, so does the other. So when you recognize that you're not separate, you're one with Source, you're absolutely loved, then sin isn't even an issue. But sin, a lot of it is, well, all of it actually, all of the things we make up after the separation are made up concepts. So before the separation, we're one. It's just one beautiful, frequency. After the separation, we make up all kinds of stories. We make up guilt and sin and just about everything.
Bad karma and bad luck and all that stuff,
yeah,
right?
Karma, oh God, karma's something people dare not touch. You have to keep the karma thing going. But it's an illusion too.
So what do you feel is some of the first steps for a person who's pretty locked in the mundane and have a lot of the guilt in their life is kind of holding them back from, going through that doorway to their enlightenment? What would be some of the first steps that you would suggest people take?
Well, some of the little steps that you can take is, first of all, just think of a plant. It's like uprooting a plant that's in the shade. I mean, it can be that simple because it is that simple. It just takes an instant to go from the sense of separation to the sense of oneness. And it can take an instant as well. I mean, I've had people who have read this book, even though it's not quite, it just came out now, and they've actually had that moment of, oh my God, I'm not guilty, I'm not bad, and I'm free. So they've actually experienced that instant of enlightenment from having read it. So it's kind of like a live book, because once the masters tell me I have to do something, then they also use the book to help others that way. So it's that simple. So focusing from one state of being to another. So you're uprooting a plant that's in the shade, and you just want to replant it in the sunshine, in the sunlight. Or you're putting a plug in a socket, and we've had it in the wrong socket, which is guilt and sin and karma and doership. I did it all, so I must be wrong. All of those things, we had it in the wrong socket. And incidentally, the scientists are also saying that we're not the doers of action. In fact, actions happen, but we don't even know about it till like a minute or so later. So in a sense, they're saying we don't do anything. And that's the scientists, which is very interesting. But nevertheless, we've got this plug in the wrong socket with all of the, the guilt and fear and all of that stuff. And it takes a moment to go, okay, this plant needs to go over here, this plug needs to go over here. And we take it out of the socket and we put it in the socket of, I'm a mortal spirit. I'm a mortal spirit. This body has nothing to do with who I really am. Because who we really are is something much greater than the body-mind. We are so loved, and anyone that's experienced that knows how absolutely loved we are at all times. We hear about people who've had the near-death experiences, and all they talk about is being so loved. They can't believe how loved we are. So
they're enveloped in it. If a person, just somebody off the street, comes to you and they're very closed, they're extremely closed, and they need to get in touch with that source, what would you suggest them going into a meditation, some type of guided meditation? How would the person who doesn't know how to even get to that source just be able to tap into it?
Well, first of all, when someone comes who's very close, I send them to regular therapy, because in regular therapy then they can work out some things that have made them feel very heavy, and then that makes them a little lighter. Mm-hmm. But when they are able to get to reach a place of being a little bit lighter, then they can begin to focus in a different way. Like some spiritual seekers believe that in order to be free of the world and to grow and gain enlightenment, they need to give up everything. But nobody has to give up everything. We don't have to renounce our wealth or status or anything of the world. All we have to give up is the I, me, and mine. So even that would be a practice. And I do a practice with people which is called a soul cleanse. And what I do is and it's a great thing, because, when we consider how much cleansing we try to do on our bodies to make the body feel better.
Right.
But we don't really think of the soul. And so in the soul cleanse, it's a really neat thing to do. I like to do it on myself all the time when I get moving in the wrong direction. And it's a matter of just cleaning the decks and take all your identifications off. So in other words, I'm bad, I'm not doing this right, they hate me, or whatever it is, all the things that we come up against in a day. And just start to let them go. Just let them go till you let the person go eventually. The I, me, and the mine. So you finally get back to a place where even the person has gone, and you're in the place of beingness at that point, where you're just simply before you made up the story. So you're at the place of just I am. Before you say I am Susan, I am Fred, I am a man, a woman, a doctor, a lawyer. Get rid of the labels. No doctors, no lawyers, no Susans, no Freds. Just gently, just cleanse it away. It's almost like you're cleaning out all your closets when you do that. And then you finally get back to the just I am before you've made anything up. And you just kind of rest there. Just sort of like being held in that place of love. And you don't have to get upset about anything, because there's nothing to get upset when you don't have an identity. Even if it's just for 5 minutes. But if we can do that regularly, it's a little easier for some people than even meditation, because some people's minds go crazy with meditation. That's understandable at the beginning. But to just simply take off the labels. Just, I'm not anybody, I'm nothing. And then rest in that clear, clean space, and just imagine your soul just cleansing, and your body at the same time. It's quite a neat thing. And it does really work with people.
That sounds like an interesting therapy. It does. What type of things are apt to come up through this cleansing? I know that when we do a cleansing with our physical bodies, we have a lot of gunk that comes out. And how do people deal with that type of stuff? Like, if they're going to cleanse themselves spiritually, there's going to be a lot of memories, there's going to be a lot of angst, there's going to be a lot of behaviors that come up. And is it just simply a method of when they come up to release them with love, or how do you do that? What is your method for that?
Well, the thing that always comes up is, of course, the ego, the separation, and the desire and the wanting to hang on to it. Like, no, I don't want to let go of Susan or Fred. I don't want to let go of that. I'll die. So really, it's a fear of death that people come up against with this. Because when we let all of the gunk go, it feels like we're going to die. But in fact, it's the opposite that happens. We're going to live. So when people hit that place, I just encourage them that they're not going to die. Nothing's going to happen. They're just going to be cleansed and they're going to be happy. So sometimes it's a lot simpler than some other methods that I've used over the years, because it's just reminding people that, they're totally held. They're totally held in this energy as they're undoing themselves. And then they get used to it and they really start to crave it because it's something that they feel they need to do to clear the decks, and they can do it in a minute or two eventually. So anywhere you are, you don't have to close your eyes and meditate. You can just do it while you're walking around.
We as psychics, we talk to a lot of people that have a lot of relationship issues, and some of the biggest ones out there, like I would have to say that they are absolutely huge, is when all of a sudden that person that they've been involved in either disappears or tells them that they can't be in the relationship anymore. They don't give them an explanation, and that is very hard for them to deal with. And in some instance like this, what would you do in your particular type of therapy to, get rid of some of those fears, because it really feels like a fear of abandonment?
Absolutely. Well, I've got one chapter on this whole topic, and I call it Upset for the Wrong Reason. And what it is it was my own experience of going through a deep suffering and pain with my ex-husband. And I split with him years and years ago, but this thing came up out of nowhere. And I was longing, and just each day I was getting more and more pain in my body. I just thought, what is going on here? Why am I suffering over this breakup? And the guilt and all of the questioning. It's almost like the darkness of the ages, as I mentioned before, came up. Mm-hmm. It does when we break up with somebody. It's just, it hits our deepest. That's when you hit the quantum guilt. That's an example of quantum guilt. So I hit this, and I was longing to go back with him and all this stuff. And this is I'm talking like decades later. And I didn't even talk to the man. But it was there to bring this very lesson out for me so I could write about it. So I said, okay, I got to sit down with myself. This is a bit much. And I said, do I really want to go back? No. Do I really want to live with him again? No. Do I want to be married to him? No. As I went through this list, I realized, well, then what is my problem? If I don't want to do all this stuff with this guy, then what is my problem? And then it came to me because I prayed. I said, look, you've got to help me here because I'm not going through this another day. And it came to me that, I've hit the core of my sense of separation. I feel like I'm separate. I've separated from myself. So when I recognized that, I said, okay, I've separated from myself. How am I going to get back to myself? Because this hurts like hell. So I kept praying, and I said, please forgive me for separating from you. I was talking to my deep inner self, God, Creator, whatever a person likes to call it. Please forgive me for separating from you. And then I saw my husband outside of me, and I saw him, it wasn't even about him. I saw him as more of a superimposition or a projection of that suffering that was just going on in me alone. So there was no husband. There is not another out there in this particular situation. It's only between us and our source. So when I got that and I saw his innocence, that he was just the player that I needed so that I could see this in myself, then I just relaxed and I was able to forgive myself and forgive him. And I didn't even know what I was forgiving him about. There was nothing to, but he was actually, it looked like he was causing my pain, but it wasn't that way at all. I was just separating from my source and giving him all the power. So basically I had to take back the power to myself.
Took back your own personal power, right?
Personal power, and the power of the oneness, the power. I've never left. I'm one with source. I'm one with him too, I'm one. And when I got back to that power, I was fine. And I never thought of him again. But I had to get to that place of my own personal power, but not just at a personality level. It was my personal power of my true, real self, the self that goes beyond, all thoughts, all words, all situations, all relationships. We all have that place, and we all know it somehow. There's a part of us that knows who we really are, deep down, but we go over it because it's the tiniest little voice possible. But we do know. We all have that in us. And that's where we want to go back to that power where, okay, I am okay. I'm already with my source. I'm already loved.
Those are definitely words of truth. We're going to pause for a moment here, Devrah, so that we can take a little bit of a commercial, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at PsychicAccess.com.
Okay, we're back with Devrah Laval, and we're speaking about quantum guilt and the path to enlightenment. It's very interesting stuff, and we were talking about, letting go in relationships and, trying to find ourselves through the experience of once we've experienced a bad relationship or a breakup. And I wanted to ask you, what would be your thoughts on, in personal relationships like marriages, and even if you're not married and you're with somebody, there's an awful lot of that guilt that goes back and forth from person to person. And do you write about any of that type of dealing with a personal relationship that you're in?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I have an interesting, I write a lot about that personal interaction and what we do with it. And I have an interesting story of, I'll use this as an example. It wasn't a direct personal relationship, but it doesn't matter. It applies to everything. I was going to the gym with this friend one day, and she was tying up her shoes, and I was tying up mine to, get to the gym. And she kept saying, I'm fat. I'm so fat. I just hate it. I'm fat. I'm fat. And she did this all the way to the gym. And so I said, you're not fat. You look fine. You're a beautiful girl. She looked terrific. But no, I'm fat. I'm fat. I'm fat. So we get to the gym, and she's, getting ready for the class. And this woman walks right over to her, looks her in the face and says, you're fat, and you need to go on a diet and work out more. And I looked and I said, do you know her? And she goes, I've never seen her in my life before. And I said, well, how could, I was just like flabbergasted.
What a declaration.
And so I said to her, well, you have been saying that you're guilty a lot, or that you're, well, there we go, that's unconscious guilt too. You have been saying that you're fat a lot. And she goes, that's got nothing to do with it. Now, that's what we do in relationships. We don't recognize that we're in relationships for a particular reason. A relationship is a gift, whether you're in it or you're not in it, or it's over, it's, whatever it is. It's all there to show us ourselves, whether we're in a close relationship like a marriage or people at work or anywhere. I have a chapter in my book called The Perfect Relationship, and it really, I put it out here in one of the magazines, and they were lining up to get it because everybody needs the relationship thing. But it's just like we're in a relationship because we're seeing ourselves. What a gift. Because we're trying to get back to oneness, these people come into our life. And for me, it was my mother. That was a tough one because she was tough when I was growing up. It was like, it was criticism all the time. And I've spent years in that kind of situation. So I had to really go deep, and really, finally, I did after years. I was a lot older then, but I finally saw her as my own self. She was channeling the darkness I was running in myself. And when I saw that, I could forgive her. And when I could forgive her, we were fine. It was no problem. And she would criticize me, and I just let it fall off my back. And it's the same in our marriages. It's just we're always, they're the most intense. If we can work through our marriage, we can do anything. That is the fastest way to enlightenment, because you're facing your quantum guilt head on in your relationship. And if you know it's quantum guilt, then you can go, okay, all this stuff is up inside of me. I don't have to project it onto my partner. Let me just go into the bathroom, close the door, and go, okay, all this is coming up, all this rage and all this abandonment and pain. It's got nothing to do with them. They're just the outer, because if we live in oneness, they're us. There's nobody out there but our own self. So that's why we deal with it as our own self. And surprisingly enough, when people really take this to heart and really go inside and forgive, see the innocence in their partner and see the innocence in themselves, and take their projection back from that person. In other words, you're really furious with your partner about something. But if you take the time to take that fury back and see it as your own anger that has been triggered, then you can start to look at it, and you can start to bring love to it and forgiveness, and you might cry or whatever, and then you can bring love to yourself, and you come back out and your partner's making you a sandwich or something because they've been lifted as well. So really,
you've changed the energy.
Yeah, change the energy, seeing the innocence. It's forgiving. I call it in my book quantum forgiveness. It's quantum forgiveness because you need quantum forgiveness from the quantum guilt. Because ordinary forgiveness is, I forgive you. That kind of forgiveness.
But then you really don't. Then you really.
And you don't, because it's the body trying to forgive a body, and now that doesn't really work because the person feels a bit condescended to. But when you do that deep forgiveness, they don't even have to know you've done it. They don't even know they're forgiven. They don't know anything. They're just out there, hey, let's go to the show, or, or they may even come up and give you a kiss on the cheek, or God knows, anything can happen. But this works. When I work with my people with this, it always works. People always have a shift of some sort that is in the best interest of themselves and the people in their life.
Well, let's go a little bit deeper into this. We talked about relationships, and that's really everybody. Probably 90% people are all focused on love and relationships. But then with health, in a situation with health like disease and deep healing, how does the guilt and the disconnection, figure in a person's healing, like healing something that's perhaps something like cancer or something that's terminal of that nature?
Well, everything, it's the same thing. It's the same thing in a sense. It's not about not acknowledging the cancer. It's not about not, acknowledging the fact that it's terminal. It's not really that. I work with people that have things like cancer or whatever. But what we do is we go to the place where we're not that. We're not the body. It's really about going there. First of all, you have to take care of yourself physically. You have to, do whatever you can do with your doctors or maybe hands-on healers or whatever. But the other part of it is when we put all of our focus just on the body, then we limit ourselves because we need to put it on our soul. We need to put our focus on the soul. I remember a group that I was in for a while. I studied with a Chinese master, and we would sit there, and people would come in with all kinds of diseases, and we would sit there, and they wouldn't put any focus on the body at all. It would just be on the soul. And people would come out of there with amazing healings. And even if they didn't, it wasn't about having to heal or not having to heal. It was about the real healing is coming to our sense of oneness, our soul, our self-love, our completion, that's the real healing. That's, because when we look at life, it is short. And really we're all going towards that oneness, all that completion of what we came here for in the first place, which is our purpose, to go back home.
In this lifetime.
Well, yeah, in any lifetime, really. Because we are just the one. And we have always been just the one. But it's like what they call transmigration, we're spinning around for what looks like lifetime after lifetime. But in a sense, though, time is happening it's all happening at the same time. So it's all in one.
I can definitely
and no matter what
agree
we're
with
doing,
that.
who we are, whether we're plant, animal, or we're evolving back to that place of oneness.
So healing, the ancients always said that healing starts in the mind, whereas, and being, healing and illness also starts in the mind. So taking on guilt and holding it could, wouldn't you say, attract physical ailments to the body?
Absolutely. These things, but you see, at the bigger level, even there's a perfection to. That's one of the things I say at the end of my book. This is perfect, that is perfect. It's from an Indian scripture that there's a perfection to everything. And that's another level, place we can take guilt off of, because even if we have been, I'm really wary of some of the things that people do in the New Age movement, and that is we have a way of putting guilt on ourselves when we're sick, because, what did we do to attract this? How did we, if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't be sick now. But at the big level, everything, we're like in a script. It's all been scripted. And if we can bring love to every single situation rather than judgment, and I'm wary of bringing any judgment to any illness. It's just loving the guilt. If you're guilty, love it. Because one of the thing that kills guilt is love. So when we're really feeling guilty, just love it. Put it to death. That's how we put the guilt to death, is we love it to death. We love our pain to death. We love our joy to death. We love all of it to death. So that way it keeps us out of the other place where we're judging ourselves for coming up with a disease, or because we don't know. We don't know why. we look at some of the greatest masters that ever lived. I mean, they all died with cancer and this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, these guys were like totally, so high. It was incredible. They could raise people from the dead if they wanted. But they died with this, that, and the other. But they had no sense of it being a problem. They only had love for whatever was going on. And that's what I think we need to bring to everything, is that deep love that says, yeah, so this is what's happening, but I am absolutely loved exactly the way I am, because we really do feel less than when we get sick. We feel less than, we feel like a burden, we feel a lot of things. But I'm saying, no, that's not where you have to go. Where you have to go is, okay, this is the gift for now. This is the love this is where I have to put more love in my life. It's just loving myself even deeper.
Well, it's definitely a practice because a person would definitely these type of things are not easy. It's just the human tendency to go down instead of go upwards in the upward spiral, and claiming the love is definitely a challenge. But I really appreciate you telling us about your methods here, and we are at the end of our interview. But I do want to tell everybody about tell us a little bit about the two books and what are their names and where we can get them.
Okay, well, the first book's called The Magic Doorway into the Divine, and that one is they're both on Amazon. They're both you can get them in any bookstore. And but let me just tell you about a campaign we're having for the new book that's coming out called Leap to Freedom, Healing Quantum Guilt. And in this campaign, I'm giving from the show a special offering to your listeners to make available a list of sponsors and their gifts with various values upwards of $1,000 to anyone purchasing a copy of Leap to Freedom from Amazon or the local bookstore. And you just simply send my office the purchase confirmation number, and that would go to info@DevrahLaval.com. And we'll gift you the list once it's completed. And it'll include CDs, music, ebooks, free workshops, even a workshop that where I had my first enlightenment experience will be in there as a gift. Discounts of various kinds and more. And this is available to your listeners. And I invite you all to please share this with your friends and anyone that's listened to this show, because I'll equally honor their purchases as well.
Oh, thank you. And your website is again? Would you like to tell us?
Well, my website is www. Let me find these pages. Okay, yeah. You can just go to info@DevrahLaval.com, and that way, once you purchase the book, then you can get the gift.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I have great respect for your work, and it's been a great interview. Thank you for joining us, Devrah.
Thank you so much. It was lovely.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 60-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers. Get access. Psychic access. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.
At one level. But once you've experienced your divine self, it doesn't have to be. It can take. It's sort of like another angle to it. You can enjoy things from a whole other level. So at the time, of course, it was very ego-based, and that's why I was so empty, because I was so separated from myself, and I really wanted something that was really real. But afterwards, I found that I could enjoy all sorts of things without feeling separate anymore, because I knew who I was at that point.
So the feeling of separateness do you believe that that's related to the subject of your next book, which is healing guilt? Do you believe that that separateness, and like when we come into this world, we don't come with any guilt. It's set upon us in our life experiences.
Well, I think guilt is the greatest separator of all. The guilt is what keeps us from our enlightenment, because as long as we have guilt, we don't allow ourselves to feel our divine self. And I was really curious about this. All the clients I had would have tons of guilt, and friends, and everyone was talking about guilt all the time, and grief and sadness. And I thought, okay, we've got to look at this. I've got to look at this. I'm going to, research this and see what the heck is going on with this. So I looked at psychological guilt. I did something wrong, or I didn't do something I should have done. And that wasn't doing it for me. It was like, yeah. Or even existential. That felt closer because it was a little bit more mystical, and you were longing for something that you didn't know. But then it was healing soon followed this experience. This enlightened experience was so profound that it literally changed my life forever and put me in a completely different direction. And to top it off, my uterus actually grew back shortly thereafter, which they said was a miracle. But that wasn't even the big part of it. That was sort of a little offshoot of the real experience of oneness and love with, my experience was, I am God. This is God. And then even the word God fell away. I mean, it was just pure light. So that does change one's life, and I would say that's about where it all started. And then I began to study with masters and gurus. I spent my whole life basically, in ashrams and meditation and teaching it. And after that experience, there was nowhere else I could really go. It just sort of guided me. And people then came out of nowhere for sessions and for counseling. And perception was so transformed, and I just realized I'm not this body-mind, and I could never go back.
Well, I think that and that's a good point that you made. Once we set, and I know I can speak for all the rest of the hosts on this show, because there's 3 more other hosts on the show, and I know I can speak for them that once we set our foot on that path, you might step off it for a little bit, but you always come back to it. You can't. It's an integral part of your life from there on. That sounds like you experienced a miraculous healing.
I did. It's kind of neurotic in that you would be, that kind of guilt places or projects onto everything, something to be feeling bad about. But eventually I did the research with the masters, and I'd spend all my time in, ashrams and everything, and had access to a lot of teachings, as well as my own experience, because when I experienced that divine love, there was no guilt, there was no oneness, there was nothing. It was gone. So what I came to from my research, and I researched everything from the Sikhs to the Course in Miracles on this deep guilt, which is the reason we have it. It's a core guilt. It goes beyond all other guilts. And what it is that we have a belief that we've actually separated from our source. We believe that we're here in a dualistic way, but in fact, we're not. In fact, we're already one. So it's that kind of guilt that follows you around, and you don't necessarily see it as guilt. It could come in the form of abandonment, anger, rage, grief. It could come in the form of pretty much anything that's ego-based, anything that's about separation. And so what I discovered from this is the core. This is the real core of our guilt. For example, the teachings of Buddhism say that guilt is missing the mark. We only have guilt because we've missed the mark. We've missed the mark, being that we've...
And there's been so much, written about all of that and documented about miraculous healings. And so were these experiences that you had, this is what eventually had inspired you to write your books, The Magic Doorway to Enlightenment?
Well, part of it was that. I mean, I wasn't planning to write a book at all. Most of my books have come from receiving commands from from the higher beings, and I was given a command: you must write this book, and it gave me an idea of what it would be and what it would look like, and it would have poetry, and it would have like essays, and all of it was set out a long time ago, and I of course didn't want to do it because I didn't consider myself a writer, and the group that I was leading at the time kept encouraging me to write the book. And then I happened to run into a Indian mystic, and he said, "You must write that book." Well, he didn't even know I was even thinking about it, or that it had even come through my mind. He said, "You must write that book. It will help a lot of people." So eventually I was broken down, and I started scratching away, and it really took about 12 years to put that first book together, because I had to feel that I had experienced everything that I had written.
And it's interesting when you talked about your background as a dancer and a model and all of that. Those types of, careers tend to really be ego-based. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, they can be very ego-based.
Please welcome Devrah. How are you this evening?
I'm terrific. How are you?
I'm
Lovely
doing
to meet
good.
you.
I'm glad to speak with you.
Yeah, it's great.
So, first of all, I want to start out with, how did you discover your own personal spiritual path?
Well, it happened quite a few years ago, I would say. Well, I won't tell you how many.
That's okay. That'll be our secret.
We'll keep that a secret. But I was about 29 at the time, and I was modeling and dancing. But I had something that would go on inside of me all the time, kind of like a longing for something that I didn't really know what it was exactly. But I thought it was children, so I decided, okay, I'm going to have to get pregnant. I have to have children. Problem was, I hadn't menstruated for years. So I went to a specialist and discovered that my uterus had, in his words, dissolved. So I was devastated, as you can imagine, when you're at that age where you're just longing to have kids. So I went, through the medical route and didn't have much success. But then I sought out some healing modalities, including meditation. And it was during one meditation retreat that I had what is called a direct experience of the truth, or enlightenment, of who and what I really am. Now, this was the most profound moment I'd ever experienced. I experienced absolute love, a love that went far beyond the confines of just our body and mind. It was beyond anything that I'd ever experienced up until that point. And then a miraculous